Maybe they're sitting somewhere else.
Wait, say that again.
So we're doing a live stream as well.
Right.
Live stream is different from the Zoom.
That's right. Yeah, so they'll have comments on there. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll be able to see. I see it, but there obviously is no conversation.
You have the live screen. You have the live stream on the screen there somewhere.
Yeah, I do. I see it. I see it.
You'll be able to see the questions and you can answer them on the screen.
Got it. Got it. Perfect.
Yeah. Give me 1 second. Thank you all. 1 second.
Oh, and you call. What's up?
I hear you speaking on the line. Okay. So they should turn this up. Three, four.
I can hear you loud and clear. Who are we waiting on? You can kick off the meeting. We're ready. Andy, kickstart the meeting. We're ready. The stream's on. We're ready to start. Shall I give you a countdown?
Okay.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Live.
Good afternoon, all. I just want to welcome everybody to the program here, our Black History program, sort of culminating our Black History program on behalf of the president of Downstate Health Sciences University. We have Jerry Mitchell with us today. And for those of you who don't know Jerry Mitchell, it is truly an honor to have him with us today. I want to do a brief introduction for those of you who don't know who he is. I'm going to read his bio, obviously, because I don't want to miss anything. I'm reading sort of a very short version of his bio, which certainly won't do him justice, but it's going to be a lot better than me attempting to do this on my own. So Jerry Mitchell, I had a chance to meet him in the home of Rena Evers, the daughter of Medgar Evers in Jackson, Mississippi. And just sitting and listening to him was, I was in complete awe. And to have this opportunity to have this conversation with him and mostly have him have the conversation with all of us is truly awesome. He has been called a loose cannon, a pain in the ass, and a white traitor. No matter what he's been called, Jerry Mitchell has never given up in the quest of seeking justice. His work helped put 4 Klansmen behind bars: Byron De La Beckwith for the 1963 assassination of NAACP leader Medgar Evers, Imperial Wizard Sam Bowers for ordering the fatal firebombing of NAACP leader Vernon Damer's home in 1966, Bobby Cherry for the 1963 bombing of the Birmingham Church, the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, that killed 4 girls, and Edgar Ray Killen for helping organize the 1964 killings of civil rights workers James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner, popularized by the fictional film Mississippi Burning, for which I'm sure many of you have already seen. His work also led to a trial of serial killer Felix Vale, believed to have killed at least 3 women. In 2016, a Louisiana jury convicted Vale of murdering his first wife nearly 54 years earlier. This is basically the oldest conviction in a serial killer case, and perhaps the oldest solved cold case in the US history. His stories have exposed injustices and corruption, prompting investigations, state reforms, and firings of boards and officials. He is a Pulitzer Prize finalist, a longtime member of investigative reporters and editors, and a winner of more than 30 other national awards, including a $500,000 MacArthur Genius Grant. And he is a genius. I will be the first to say that. His memoir, which he will discuss today, Race Against Time, details how some of the nation's most notorious murders have come to be punished years later. After reading a book author John Grisham raved, the first 2 decades, investigative journalist Jerry Mitchell doggedly pursued Klansmen responsible for some of the most notorious murders of the civil rights movement. This book is an amazing story. Thanks to him and the courageous prosecutors, witnesses, and FBI agents, justice finally prevailed. Again, that's according to John Grisham. Harvard University law professor Randall Kennedy, for which many of us know, said of the book that it was a brave work. It deserves praise, it deserves gratitude, and it deserves a wide audience. Oprah Winfrey Magazine said that readers can expect an electric feeling on every page. I know I had that feeling when I read the book, as his remarkable shoe leather effort finally began to bring about the justice that Martin Luther King Jr. dreamed of. After working for 30 years in the statewide Clarion Ledger in Jackson, Mississippi, Mitchell retired, and he basically started the Mississippi Center for Investigative Reporting, which is a nonprofit that exposes injustices, inequities, shines a light on possible solutions, investigates cold cases, gives voice to the voiceless, and raises up the next generation of investigative reporters. I don't have anything else to say other than, without further ado, I bring to you Jerry Mitchell.
All right. All right, it's great to be with you guys. This is the cover of my book, and it tells the story really of some very courageous people. And one of those, and we'll be talking about them, one of those is Medgar Evers. Medgar Evers fought in Normandy in World War II, fought the Nazis, and came home only to fight racism all over again in the form of Jim Crow that barred African Americans from restaurants, from restrooms, and of course from voting booths as well. So Medgar Evers became field secretary at the NAACP, put about 40,000 miles a year. I was Oldsmobile, going around Mississippi investigating unpunished killings of African Americans, beatings of African Americans, et cetera, violence against African Americans, as well as helping form new chapters at NAACP. And on the same night that President Kennedy told the nation that the grandsons of slaves were still not free, Medgar Evers was shot in the back in his own driveway, and his wife and children rushed out, saw the blood, and screamed. I don't know about you, but if someone tells me I can't have something, I want it like a million times worse. I don't know if anyone else is like that. I'm like that. But this is a kind of a picture of one of the documents in the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission files. The Mississippi Sovereignty Commission was a state segregationist spy agency in Mississippi. It operated from the 1950s into the 1970s and basically had a total of more than 132,000 pages of spy files. So when I found out that the Mississippi legislature had sealed all those records for 50 years, my first thought was, well, there's something in there. I mean, they wouldn't be sealing it for 50 years if there wasn't something in there. So I began to develop sources, and they began to leak me the files. And what they showed was at the same time the state of Mississippi was prosecuting Byron D. LeBeckwith for murdering Medgar Evers. This other arm of the state, the Sovereignty Commission, was secretly assisting the defense, trying to get him acquitted. And this is a photo of Myrlie Evers. At the time, I wrote my story October 1st of 89. And at the time I wrote my story, the odds were literally more than 1,000,000 against the case ever being reopened, re-prosecuted. But Myrlie Evers believed, and she prayed, and some amazing things happened. A couple of months later, Jackson police are cleaning out a closet, happened to find a box that contained the crime scene photographs of the killing of Medgar Evers, including the fingerprint of Byron D. LeBeckwith lifted from the murder weapon. A few months after that, Myrlie Evers shared with me her copy of the court transcript that she had saved in a safety deposit box. And a few months after that, the prosecutor in the case found the murder weapon in his father-in-law's closet, which sounds like I'm making it up, but it really did happen. So I went to go interview Mr. Beckwith. You can probably guess how I found his house. And went and interviewed him. This is April of 1990. I went and interviewed him. And interviewed him for about 6 hours. Absolutely the most racist person I ever spent serious time with. Just inward this, inward that. And they started in all the other non-white races. He believed Adam and Eve were white, believe it or not. And he just believed all sorts of crazy things, and very racist. So, you know how you go and you talk to someone after a while, you feel like maybe you need to go get a bath or something. That was kind of how I felt when I got done with talking to Byron D. LeBeckwith. But, it started to get dark, and I thought it was a really good time to go. And so he insisted on walking me out to my car. And I'm like, really? That's okay. I think I can find my way. So he walked me out to the car anyway. It says, if you write positive things about white Caucasian Christians, God will bless you. If you write negative things about white Caucasian Christians, God will punish you. If God does not punish you directly, several individuals will do it for him. And so his wife had made me a sandwich. I think you can guess what I did with the sandwich. So anyway, he got indicted for the murder of Medgar Evers in late 1990. He fought extradition. He lost that battle, and he wound up in the courtroom. At the time that I interviewed him, he had no idea I was the one that wrote the story that got the case reopened. By now, he'd figured it out. And so he saw me across the courtroom, and he was talking to some reporter was asking him a question. He's like, you see that boy over there? When he dies, he's going to Africa. So I turned to a friend of mine, I've always wanted to go to Africa. So Byron D. LeBeckwith was convicted of murder in the exact same courtroom he'd been tried almost 30 years to the day. And when the word guilty rang out, you could hear the waves of joy as they cascaded down the hall till they reached a foyer full of people, black and white, just erupted in cheers. And Myrlie Evers and her wife, Rena, cheered as well. And I just felt chills because the impossible had suddenly become possible. Not too long after Byron D. LeBeckwith was indicted, I met with this woman. Her name is Ellie Damer, and she's holding a photograph of her late husband, who's Vernon Damer. Vernon Damer was a farmer, businessman, very early leader in the NAACP, back when the NAACP met underground in Mississippi. It was so dangerous. And so he was dedicated to voting rights. And the Klan didn't like that, attacked him and his family in the middle of the night, January 10th, 1966. They firebombed their house, Klan firebombed their house, began firing their guns into the house. Vernon Damer woke up, grabbed a shotgun, ran to the front of the house, began firing back at the Klansmen so that his family could escape safely out a back window. Unfortunately, the flames of the fire seared his lungs, and he died later that day. a few weeks later in the mail came his voter registration card. He had fought his whole life for the right of all Americans to be able to vote, but never been able to cast a ballot himself. The guy, at the time of the killing, he had 4 sons in the military, and 6 of his 7 sons served a total of 78 years in our nation's armed forces. And when the 4 that were in the military at the time came home, this is what they found. The guy who ordered the killing was this guy. His name is Sam Bowers, the head of the White Knights, responsible for at least 10, probably 11 or 12 killings at least in Mississippi. So Sam Bowers had ordered this killing. He'd never been convicted. The Vernon Dahmer family, contacted me, and I drove down to Hattiesburg and met with them. And anyway, not long after I met with them, then they met with the district attorney. And basically he reopened the case, acted interested, but pretty quickly got cold feet. So, had an excuse. And then when that got taken care of, he had another excuse, and you get the picture. And then he didn't run again for office. And so this other guy came in who seemed to have even less interest in the case. And so I got a fellowship to go to Ohio State to get my master's. So I was literally in Ohio in the spring of 1997. I got this telephone call from this guy who wouldn't identify himself, but wanted to talk to me. Said he had information in the Vernon Dahmer case. And so I flew back to Mississippi, met with him and his buddy and 2 sons of Vernon Dahmer, and basically proceeded to tell us the story of how that he had overheard Sam Bowers give the orders to kill Vernon Dahmer. And so anyway, after he met with us, he met with the district attorney, and then the attorney general's office got involved in investigating this case. The guy who'd been the key witness back in 1960 was this guy. His name was Billy Roy Pitts, who's involved in the killing of Vernon Dahmer. Dropped his gun, got caught, pleaded guilty to murder, got a life sentence for that, pleaded guilty to federal charges, got time for that. So I was just researching how much time these Klan guys actually spend in prison, which was kind of a joke back in Mississippi in these days, because the governor would pardon them. Like if they actually got convicted, the governor would pardon them, or he would commute their sentence, or you get the picture. And so I got to him, and I knew he had this federal sentence, and then I also knew about his state sentence. Well, I couldn't find any record of his state time, but what authorities told me was that he had gone to the Federal Witness Protection Program. That's why I couldn't find it. So I'm doing research. I'm talking to the Federal Bureau of Prisons in Washington, and I'm asking them about his sentence. How much did he actually serve in prison? And the woman, because it was a 5-year sentence, and she came back to me and said, well, 3.5 years is how much he actually served. I said, now I understand he left federal prison and went into the Witness Protection Program. And the archivist said, that's impossible. I said, what are you talking about? I said, there was no Witness Protection Program back then. I'm like, you're kidding. And so what this meant was Billy Roy Pitts had never served a single day of his life sentence in Mississippi, not one day, which struck, I'd never heard of. And so I didn't know if the guy was alive, dead, where he was. And it was relatively early days of the internet, but I knew there was an internet site I could go on and just type in the name without having a city or state and kind of take my chances. And so I did. And up it popped. Billy Roy Pitts had his address, Denham Springs, Louisiana, has his telephone number. So I called him. First 20 minutes of the conversation went like this. How'd you find me? How'd you find me? I'm like, it's on the internet. The internet, I can list the telephone number. I'm like, I guess you have to take it up with him. So the result of my story that he never served a single day of his life sentence, Mississippi authorities issued a warrant for his arrest. And so he didn't like that. And he actually ran. And while he was on the run, he sent me this audio cassette. And when I got it, I played it, and this is how it began. Jerry, I just thought I'd let you know you've ruined my life. But I promise if I talk to anybody, I'd talk to you. So here's his tape. And on his tape proceeds to tell me all this involvement, Klan violence he was involved in, all this other the Vernon Dahmer murder that he was involved in. And so shortly after, after he gave me this tape and I did a story, he turned himself into authorities. And this now led to the arrest of Sam Bowers. Also arrested was Bowers' right-hand guy, whose name is Devers Nix. When the family brought Devers Nix in, it was like the most pitiful sight you've ever seen. They wheeled him into the wheelchair with the oxygen tank and got him up in front of the judge. And he's like, I can't take more than a couple steps without needing oxygen, Judge. The judge's like, well, I normally don't do this, but I'm going to let you out without bond. A dozen days later, this is like a reporter's dream. We caught him here on the golf course. So he got arrested. Yeah, he loved me. So fast forward, Sam Bowers goes on trial, and guess who's there to testify on his behalf? But Devers Nix, Mr. Golfer. And so he's trying to work out, Devers Nix is trying to work out a signaling system with his lawyer. I just happened to overhear it. He's like, he's trying to inform, your Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, you can take at any point, even on the witness stand. So he's talking to him, kind of working out a signaling system on this. Now, Devers, when you get up there, you need to take the fifth. I'm going to raise my hand. Devers like, okay. So Devers gets up, he starts testifying. I looked over his lawyer. His lawyer fell asleep. So Devers kept right on testifying. Yeah, I was in the Klan. He was like, try to put a positive spin on it like there is on why the Klan was a benevolent organization, passing out the fruit baskets to the needy at Christmas. Under cross-examination, the prosecutor got him to ask, Mr. Nix, just how many fruit baskets did you pass out? And Devers said, oh, sad to say, none. I swear it's the funniest trial I ever covered in my life as a reporter. Deadly serious matter, but funny trial. The guy who was a lawyer for Bowers was this guy whose name is Travis Buckley, there on the right. And Buckley was not just a lawyer for the Klan, he was actually a leader in the Klan, believe it or not. He was actually indicted for the firebombing of Vernon Dahmer at one point. So anyway, Buckley is representing Bowers in this trial, and the prosecution's kind of laying out their case through the testimony of Billy Roy Pitts, and they're asking Pitts about this planning meeting that took place prior to the attack on Vernon Dahmer and his family. It's like, the prosecutor asked him who all was at this planning meeting, and Pitts is like, I was there, Sam Bowers was there, Devers Nix was there, Travis Buckley was there. And the court reporter is like, what were those names again? He's like, Billy Roy Pitts, Sam Bowers, Devers Nix, Travis Buckley. Well, now Travis Buckley finally catches his name as being said out loud, shoots up from his chair. Objection, Your Honor. I've covered a lot of trials in my life as a reporter, but I have to say it's the only trial I ever covered where a witness implicated the defense lawyer himself. So anyway, so Sam Bowers was convicted August 21st, 1998, of the murder of Vernon Dahmer, and given a life sentence just like Beckwith. The next case I worked on, just to be honest, kind of accidentally, was the Birmingham church bombing that killed these 4 girls and blinded a 5th girl, Sarah Collins, as well. One of the last living suspects is this guy's name is Bobby Frank Cherry. And I interviewed him by phone. I was just trying to write about stories about what other cases were being looked at. This was one of them. Interviewed him by phone. Several months later, get an email from his wife who's like, Bobby wants to talk to you. So I'm like, great. And so I drove over. He lived near Tyler, Texas, which is not far from my hometown, the schizophrenic town of Texarkana. And so I knew where he lived. I drove over, met him and his wife, took him out for barbecue because I guess that's what you take Klansmen out for. I'm not really sure, but we ate barbecue, and he's like, I didn't have anything to do with that church bombing. I left that sign shop at 9:45 because I had to get home and watch wrestling. and even pulled out the sworn statement of this woman. I remember that night well. We're all sitting around watching wrestling. So, I got back to the newsroom the next day and talked to our librarian. And I remember from when I was a kid, they used to have the entire TV schedules in the newspaper. And so that's what I mentioned to the librarians, to just check with the Birmingham News and see what was on TV that night. Next day, the librarian comes back and said there was no wrestling. And it turned out he had concocted this alibi years later, apparently. So Bobby Cherry was arrested and he was convicted in this case and given 4 life sentences, 1 for each one of those girls. Remember what I told you before, if someone tells me I can't have something I want 1,000,000 times worse. Well, Sam Bowers, who never ever talked to the press or gave an interview with the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. So it was sealed though, just like the Sovereignty Commission records. So I really wanted that interview. So I was able to get that interview leaked to me. I had somebody let me come and basically read it and take notes. And in that interview, Bowers talked about what people call the Mississippi Burning case, or basically the killings of James Chaney, Andy Goodman, Mickey Schwerner. And he was convicted in that there was a federal case. Nobody ever been prosecuted for murder, but Bowers was one of 7 who actually got convicted on federal charges, although it was a bit of a joke because they hardly spent any time in prison. But anyway, but Bowers talked about that and said he was quite delighted to be convicted and have the main instigator of the entire affair walk out of the courtroom a free man. It was referring to this man, Edgar A. Killen. So I call up Edgar A. Killen. We talked for quite a while, and finally at some point he said, "There's some guy in Jackson just keeps stirring things up and stirring things up and stirring things up." And I just didn't have the heart to tell him it was me. So I took him and his wife out for catfish. So we went and ate, and I started talking to him. I asked him if he had anything to do with the killing of these 3 young men. He said no. I said, "Well, what do you think should happen to people that were responsible?" He said, "I'm not going to say they were wrong." And he proceeded to tell a story about himself. When Martin Luther King was assassinated in Memphis in 1968, the FBI at that moment in time had no idea who did it. Basically, FBI just kind of went out to the usual suspect, began asking questions on their whereabouts, April 4th, 1968. Edgar A. Killen wouldn't talk to him, but agent left his card. Time goes on. One day, Preacher Killen picks up the card, calls the agent, wants to know who killed King. And the agent's like, "Why do you want to know?" And Killen says, "Man, I want to shake his hand." Sometimes people see photographs or pictures or video of some of these older men going off to prison or being prosecuted. And they'll say to me, "Jerry, why don't you leave these old men alone?" You know what I tell them? These were young killers. They just happened to get old. Edgar A. Killen was convicted on the exact anniversary of the killings of these 3 young men. And this is what he and about 20 other men were responsible for right here, killing these 3 men and burying their bodies 15 feet down in earthen dam. Really a miracle their bodies were ever found. To date now, there have been 24 convictions in these civil rights murders, and it's a matter of faith with me, but I believe God's hand's been involved in these cases. But the hate that caused this has never really gone away. And so, what 5 or 6 years ago in Charleston, a young man walked into this church and killed these 9 beautiful people, all because of hate, And then this synagogue was attacked a few years later in Pittsburgh, 11 people killed. And then in El Paso in 2019, a man drove all the way across Texas to go to El Paso to quote unquote stop the invasion. And he killed 23 people and injured 23 others. What's interesting to me about that, the word invasion, is the exact same phrase that Sam Bowers used to describe the summer of 1964, pardon me, when the college students and others were coming in as part of Freedom Summer. And then, of course, we've had George Floyd and others who've been killed at the hands of law enforcement or armed civilians, others. And then you kind of prompting us to kind of re-examine these things, a racial reckoning, if you want to call it that. And then, of course, on January 6th, white supremacists and other, people from the radical right and others attacked our nation's capital, of course, assaulting Capitol Police and killing one of them, hurling the N-word at the black officers, waving the Confederate flag. And of course, they searched, they had handcuffs for people in the Senate and others. And of course, they had a gallows waiting outside. It's incredible what all happened. But here's the truth. We keep repeating our history because we don't know our history. We have failed to learn our history. And it's time that we welcome a true account of our painful past so that we can move forward to an honest present and a vibrant future. And it's time that we move to change what needs to be changed so that Americans of all colors can be treated equally under the law, the cause for which Medgar Evers and so many others died. It's time. Thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Jerry, that was truly awesome. Truly awesome. Thank you. I will take some questions from the live stream. For those who have questions, you can just enter your question right in the live stream chat. I'll take those questions as they come in, assuming that we do have some. On the flip side of it, I do have a couple of questions, Jerry, that I'd like to throw at you. And again, based on my reading of your book, as well as some of the details that you've added, some of the details you've added in the conversation.
Sure.
The question that I had that really came to mind was, talk to me about some of the fear that you might have had. How scared were you, if at all? Were you scared? What was probably the biggest moment of fear for you during all of these cases, during all of this investigation, talking about Klansmen, et cetera? Go ahead.
Yeah, it was, I got dozens of death threats through this. I had a guy that said he had pictures of me and knew where I lived, which was obviously disconcerting from I had a family, and I had another guy that talked about slitting my throat and leaving my body in the road and, things like that. But it kind of led to an unexpected gift, and that's the gift of living fearlessly. And because living fearlessly is not about living without fear, it's about living beyond fear. It's about living for something greater in ourselves. And that's what you see with people like Medgar Evers and Vernon Dahmer and so many others, the students who came down for Freedom Summer and others, two of whom were from New York, Andy Goodman. And for those that don't know, Andy Goodman and Mickey Schwerner were both from New York City. And the Cheney family lived in New York City. So anyway.
So are you still threatened today? Do you find yourself still getting threats today?
When I dig back into some of these things, I sometimes get, emails and different things like that. I mean, I'm kind of on the white supremacist radar. What can I say? They don't like me. They'll post, for a while there, they were like posting my picture and, things like that and saying, here's your enemy, kind of thing. It's disconcerting, but I will say that as a person of faith, that I felt like that if they kill me, I just get to go home sooner. So,
wow, that's very powerful. We did have a question from one of the viewers. Can you talk a little bit more about Mrs. Evers and her family's response to the discovery of the murder weapon?
Oh yeah, that's kind of dealt with very lightly in the movie. But yeah, if you read my book, you'll get a deeper sense of it. Um, it was just very wild from my perspective at that moment in time. It was wild because we found out that the prosecution had the murder weapon, or it's like we found out they already had it, and they had said out loud that they didn't have it. So it was they basically admitted they lied about it, and so there ended up being a federal investigation because of this. Benny Thompson, Congressman Benny Thompson, now he's congressman. He wasn't at the time, but anyway, he asked for an investigation. Local black leaders asked for an investigation. They did do an investigation, and they basically, didn't really do anything other than say, yeah, basically the prosecution does have the weapon, and they were trying. Their belief was they were going to try to keep it secret from Beckwith. But the whole story, if you read in the book, is the way I found out was through a buddy of Beckwith's, which makes no sense at all. That's one of the wildest journalism stories, and I still don't even tell it out loud. I guess I should tell it out loud once in a while. Is finding the gun. I mean, that was one of the wildest stories ever of how we found out that the prosecution, had the gun still, that they already had the gun in possession, because they had said out loud they didn't have it. It was missing.
Well, I know that there are a lot of cases out there, but can you give us just, based on your own investigations, a rough estimate of how many cases you may have come across, of this kind?
Well, there were the FBI figures now it's over 150 of these kinds of cases that we're talking about, what we might call the civil rights era, the 50s and 60s. And there, to be honest, there were far more than that. It's just, this is how many. It's kind of like, our legacy of lynchings in this country. There are unfortunately lynchings that took place that we don't have records of. In other words, like, if they didn't get written up in the newspaper, or they didn't get noted, or then they kind of got lost to history. And that's why I think what this book helps to do as well is, to reinforce our need to preserve this history, because if we don't, as we see, we just repeat our history if we don't learn from our history.
Absolutely. Another question from the chat. One question is, how can we affect change? I think it's a great question. It's probably a broad question, but again, the question's for you. How can we affect change?
Well, I think this is the way I see it. And of course, I'm a journalist, so I think in those terms. But I think, what are we looking for? We want to find justice, right? So in order to find justice, you have to start out with truth. Right? You got to have facts. You got to have truth. And it's truth that will help us find justice. And even if justice is impossible for whatever reason, you can still have truth. And you can expose that truth and you can share that truth. And so that's how I view, that's why I think journalism plays an important role in this. Kind of like David Halberstam said at one point about stuff I was working on. He said, people said it belonged to history, but it didn't belong to history at all. And he was right. Nothing had ever been done. And so it would still deserve to be looked at. And there are so many families who have lost, who had loved ones stolen from them like this. And they never knew what happened, and so that's part of what we need to do in process is to, I don't know whether the nation needs to have a kind of something similar to what South Africa had, or whatever you want to call it, some means by which we go into these cases and actually determine, okay, what really happened. The FBI has done some of that work, but I think you need to involve the families in this. I think that's one of the mistakes I think the FBI has made in doing this, is they haven't really involved the families in this process of trying to piece these cases together. What really happened? What if anything can be done today? In most of these cases, unfortunately, the suspect's dead or the witnesses are dead or all the above. So because of the age of the cases at this point, but anyway, that's the way I see it. Or it's like we have to take care of these matters to begin to bring change. We have to believe in justice and love justice to bring change. And until we love truth and love justice, things aren't going to change, unfortunately. You know, as long as people get up and can just claim whatever is true, that facts don't matter anymore, then we're on a really slippery slope, I got to say. Because, you know, when facts no longer matter, when the truth no longer matters, justice is going to be very hard to find.
Absolutely. Someone asked about the fifth Birmingham, the girl in the fifth
The
person,
fifth girl, Sarah Collins.
Birmingham bombing. I'm assuming they want to know whatever happened to her.
She's still alive. She's still alive. Sarah, her name is Sarah Collins Rudolph. And so, yeah, she's, you can find her on Facebook. I know she's on Facebook. She follows me. Anyway, but she sometimes lectures or, you know, talks to folks. So she's someone you could possibly interview or talk to as well.
Okay. Another question from the chat is, how did you make the supremacists, the white supremacists, feel comfortable talking to you?
Well, I'm a Southerner and I'm a white guy. And I like catfishing and all the Southern staples like them and barbecue and everything. Yeah, I mean, I think they felt like I was one of them, you know, if you know what I mean. I mean, I'm a white guy and I'm working for this newspaper that, you know, was a pretty horrible racist newspaper back in the 50s and 60s. And all those things helped to contribute to me being able to go and talk to them. I know Beckwith gave me this really long quiz about, you know, where'd you grow up? What are your parents' names? Where do you go to church? You know, all this long list of questions. And, you know, I knew I could, you know, I could have refused to answer, but I knew he'd love my answers, you know, because I had this like very conservative, waspish, you know, upbringing. And so I knew he'd love my answer. So I just answered honestly. And he was like, come on, see me. So, yeah, they thought I was one of them.
So someone asked, what about the recent Malcolm X assassination headlines?
Oh, well, I'm not sure which headlines you're referring to. You mean about the possible involvement, about maybe they got the wrong guy? Is that what we're referring to? Or I don't know what they're referring to exactly.
Yeah, there are no additional details there, but it just.
Yeah, there's always been some talk about, and I've talked to some people that have, you know, spent years investigating that. They've spent a lot of time doing it. There's been some, you know, there's some evidence that the people who actually went to prison were not the ones who actually did it. And I know that's the case. And I know there's also been talk of what the FBI knew at the time and maybe didn't, you know, was this actually the FBI involved in this? I don't know any evidence of that, but I know that there's been, you know, certainly the FBI was out to get Malcolm X, and to be honest, they were out to get King too. I mean, that's not a secret. They were both, you know, they were trying to destroy in any way they can. I mean, there's no question about that part of it.
Got it. There is the next Jerry Mitchell. Someone asked the question, what advice would you give someone who aspires to be a journalist? And how did
yeah, well, that's great.
Journalists for Justice, I should add.
Oh yeah, sure. Well, I think you know, just try to do what I said. I think you try to report the truth. And a friend of mine who's an investigative reporter, I like the button he had. He had a button that said, "I just catch them, I don't fry them." I like that. That's pretty good. And so, you know, that's kind of the way I view our job is we expose the truth, and we're not the judge, we're not the jury, but we expose the truth. And when you do that and do it over time, I think that's the other thing. The most important piece of advice I'd say for any journalist, period, would be to say how, you know, what would be your advice to anyone, and this way beyond journalism, any profession you go into, I would say this: be persistent, because that has everything to do with whether you're able to succeed or not. You know, because I found it in my reporting. I mean, I thought when I was young that I'd do this great investigative story, and everyone's eyes would be open, and everyone would wake up and see and want to change everything, you know, and it just doesn't work that way. As I sometimes say, you have to embarrass people sometimes into doing the right thing.
So, Jerry, I'm going to ask a question again from my own reading.
Sure.
I recall in a certain section, and again, I don't remember where it was, but you had taken certain precautions. I remember you were interviewing a Klansman, and I don't remember which Klansman it was.
Probably Edgar
He
Ray
had
Killen.
invited you. It was in Neshoba County.
Yeah, it was Edgar Ray Killen. Yeah, he invited me to his home. He invited me to his home. Yeah, he invited me to his home at like 9, 10 o'clock at night. And I'm like, I knew where this guy lived. I mean, in general, you know, I was, you know, out this dirt road, you know, in remote Neshoba County at 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And plus I was 2 hours away from where I lived. I mean, in addition to my safety concerns, it was 2 hours away from where I lived. And I'm like, I don't want to be dragging back home at, you know, 1 o'clock in the morning, or, you know, whatever it would be.
And if my memory serves me, this was the same road.
Yeah, the same road that the 3 young men were killed on.
Correct.
He only lived a mile from where they were killed.
So I guess the question is, what other precautions did you take when you were doing all of these interviews?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a good example. So instead of, you know, going, now I did go to Bobby Cherry's house and went to Beckwith's house, but instead of going to Killen's house, since of the time, you know, he wanted me to be there, you know, I chose a restaurant. I mean, you know, there are things you can do to be careful. I think you need to do that. As a journalist, you want to be careful. You don't want to do things stupid. Someone asked me, actually, Ralph Eubanks asked me, who's got a book. I think his book's out now, but anyway, it's coming out, and about Mississippi. And he asked me one time, because he was going to meet with a guy who was one of the last living members of the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission. What do I need to do? I said, well, take him out for lunch.
So someone is interested in knowing if you might investigate the Malcolm X case.
Yeah, I would love to. Like I said, I mean, the thing is, you've got people that I would love to, people that have been working on it for years. I mean, I don't know what I can, you know, I guess I wonder what I can contribute, you know, more than what people have already been doing. But you know, if anyone's got a lead on that, I'm happy to pursue it. Absolutely.
We know you will definitely take a lead, right? We know that.
Yeah. If you got a lead on that, like I said, I think the main thing I've heard has been about who actually was involved in the killing. There were 3 men. They got arrested and went to prison for it. But then there's always been talk that, you know, they weren't the right 3 men. And anyway, it's an interesting case, that's for sure.
Let me ask a more personal question.
Sure.
What was your motivation for this? I mean, obviously you've spoken to us about
Right.
you know, the fight for justice or the quest for justice. But
Yeah.
what is the motivation? What inspires someone to go into the depths of something so dangerous? You know, that, you know, we young people, I guess I could call myself.
You know, I was obsessed, and I was young. I wasn't necessarily thinking through this, you know, like maybe I should have been, as I would have. Believe me, I don't mean this egotistically at all. But as I kind of, you know, put the book together, I kind of went, I was crazy, man. I was just crazy, you know. but aside from that, I think it's always stuck in my craw when people got away with, especially with murder. And the thing is about these murders, these were not, it's not just that these guys got away with murder. It's the fact that everybody knew these guys were getting away with murder. This was like injustice at its height,
Mhm.
you know? And you know about the juries back then, they were all white, all male juries. And, you know, women couldn't even serve on juries in Mississippi until 1968. I mean, unreal. And so, much less African Americans. And so, you know, those were, anyway, it was just so incredibly, you know, obvious these injustices had taken place. And it was just like, it just stuck in my craw. It just, how could you not do something? And especially once I met the families and we get to know the families. And I always say that too, is that's been the biggest reward for me, has been getting to know the families. And you know Rena and the Evers family. And it's just, yeah, I mean, I can't say enough good things. And, you know, look, we've been talking about me, but I want to tell you the courage of these families in these cases to make sure, you know, it would have been very easy for Myrlie Evers and Rena to say, you know, we've been through enough pain. You know, we've been through enough. We don't want to have to relive this. And that would have been totally understandable, right?
Right.
But they had the courage to move forward with this. And because of their courage, that inspired others to also have families to have courage and do the same thing. And so I can't say enough good things about the families and their courage to do these things. Because they could have, you know, here I am showing up, you know, and they're, you know, they could have easily just said, you know, Jerry, go away, or, you know, whatever, we've been through enough. But they didn't. They wanted to, the Evers family, the Damer family, the families of the 4 little girls and the 3 families of the young men, you know, all wanted to see justice done, even though obviously it's late, but they, you know, and that's what they wanted. They wanted society to say, hey, this is wrong.
Right.
This is wrong. We as society are not going to stand for this. And that is important. And that's why I think that's what drove me, is I wanted to see these injustices, not just, because I don't know, just bothered me a lot. You know, someone like Byron D. LeBeck with the laughing about Medgar Evers, you know, at some point he said, well, I didn't kill that N-word, but he sure did. Ha, 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 ha. He ain't coming back. Ha, 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 ha. I just see an interview where he said that.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I mean, just lost it. I mean, it's just like, this guy, I mean, he's not only done it, he is mocking. You know, I asked him one time, you know, what do you think? Well, I asked him about if he had any sympathy or compassion for the Medgar Evers family. He told me I had about as much sympathy as an N-word getting run over by a streetcar in Chicago. Ha, 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 ha. Do they still have streetcars in Chicago? Ha, 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 ha. I mean, this is this guy. I mean, it's unreal.
Wow.
How can you not do something about that? I mean, you know, I you know, you've got to. It's just, you can't stand.
Yeah, I guess that's why you felt like you had to take a shower after.
Yeah.
Yeah.
After Beckwith, I got rid of the sandwich and got out of town. That's for sure. You know, that interesting little side note, I should mention my speech, but interesting little side note. I mentioned he lived in Signal Mountain. The other mountain over, which is, there are 2 mountains right there, is Lookout Mountain, which is the one that Dr. King spoke of
Mm-hmm.
in his I Have a Dream speech. Yeah.
He lived in that area?
Yeah, the Klan. This is what Beckwith's wife said to me. is that someone black, of course she didn't use the word black, moved in to Lookout Mountain, but they burned them out.
Oh, wow. Okay. Got it.
Yeah, it's like, wow.
Yeah. So there was a question on the chat that asked about your whether or not your family was supportive of your choice, your career choice. Now I can recall.
Yeah. My book talks a little bit about some of
Right.
that.
Yeah. Your wife wasn't too happy with it.
Yeah. My wife at the time was, it was difficult. I mean, she was, God bless her, 8 months pregnant when I went to go interview Byron D. LeBecq. So
Wow.
she just thought I was insane and that he was going to kill me. Well, she thought it was the setup. But she thought that I was going, because she said, how do you know? And the truth was, I didn't know. I mean, if he had been playing a game with me, I wouldn't have known. I was just assuming, given our previous conversations, he didn't know I was the one that wrote the story. I didn't sense any ill will from him. And so anyway, it was, so yeah, my family was very supportive, but it was certainly, for her really difficult. And even for my kids, we've kind of talked about this in retrospect. My kids sometimes didn't tell fellow students what I was, what I did, certainly in any detail. They might say I was a reporter, but they wouldn't necessarily say what I did, that kind of thing.
Right. You were a reporter, not an investigative reporter.
Yeah, well, it didn't necessarily say what I worked on, those kind of stories. So, yeah, because look, it's, and here's the other thing I got to say, just because I'm not trying to defend Mississippi in saying this, but it's so easy to look at this and go, this is, oh, how terrible Mississippi is, and da 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 da. Wasn't it terrible? Instead of seeing Mississippi as a mirror for America.
Correct.
Because it is. This is not some foreign country. This is America. Mm-hmm. And as we witnessed on January 6th, I mean, the idea that this is just Mississippi and is far from correct. And we have a real problem with a real rise in this country, white supremacy, white nationalism, and now what some people are calling Christian nationalism. And I'm a Christian myself, so I'm not attacking Christianity. What I mean by that is people who put their identity in kind of this politics, or whatever you want to call it, Christian nationalism or whatever. So we've got to be real careful to, not let hate rule. I don't know how else to put it. And that's the other thing I'd say about that is, before people hate, they fear.
Fascinating.
And when people fear, they dehumanize. And then that's what happens. And that's like, and so all of a sudden now this non-white group becomes monsters. Mm-hmm. And so if I'm a white guy and I hear some politician say this group is a bunch of monsters, how do you think I'm going to react? Well, if I kill a monster, I'm doing society a favor, right? So this is whether language matters. And when people start using language like that, you are essentially inviting violence, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah, and as someone, you kind of hit the nail on the head. Someone who lives in New York, not necessarily a native Mississippian, but I do have Mississippi roots. I went to school in Mississippi, et cetera. To talk about Mississippi and to say, yeah, you should come and visit my home in Mississippi. It's like a pregnant pause, because they just can't imagine it because they've never been there, and based on what they've heard about it, it sort of paints a picture for them that they, to some degree, they don't want to see in person.
It's the past is ugly.
Absolutely.
But that's not Mississippi today. The capital city, interestingly, might surprise people, but Jackson, the capital of Mississippi, is very much blue, not a red. Even though we are very much a red state, the capital is blue. I mean, there's no question about that. a mayor who even publicly called himself a socialist. So, you know what I mean? I mean, that might surprise you, but that's true. It's just more complicated. And I think it's really, the other thing I'd say, since we're talking about New York, did you know one of the worst racial attacks against African Americans in this country since the Civil War began actually took place in New York City? It was the draft rights in 1863. And so what happened, they ended up, this isn't in the Scorsese film, but what happened is they ended up killing, like, you know, perhaps hundreds of African Americans. They burned down, it was segregated. And so they burned down essentially the Black orphans home, you know, like burned it to the ground. And so there was a displacement of quite a few African Americans from Manhattan at that moment. Like, I think 20,000 or some kind of a pretty huge number for that point in time. So what's interesting to me about this is, to my knowledge, there is no historical marker for that. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, I'm not trying to beat up on New York in saying that, and not trying to like reverse it around and say, oh yeah, look at you, New York. But what I am saying is this: there should be some recognition for that. There should be a marker for that. You follow what I'm saying? That's dealing with our past and being honest about it, instead of like turning it around and saying, well, look at that terrible Mississippi, New York. We got rid of slavery way back, and da 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 da, and not owning up to the things that, you know, that we have done. That's the way I see that. It's just being honest about our past, and when we get honest about our past, then we can move toward a better future. It's when we're dishonest about that stuff that we get ourselves in trouble. It's like people start saying crazy crap, you know. Absolutely. And that's what's going on today. There's just so much stuff that's being said. It's just absolute lies. Yeah, it is out there over and over again. People, it's just, it's the unfortunate thing that's happened within recent years in this country. It's like, it doesn't matter anymore what the truth is. It's like, well, truth does matter. It does matter. It still matters.
Absolutely. Jerry, we are over time.
Yeah, that's fine. I want
to thank you for
thanks very much.
Your time. This has been amazing. I really hope that those who tuned in have learned something from your knowledge, have learned something from the various cases. I personally want to thank you for your courage and for what you've done for this country, not just for those families that you've helped bring justice, but what you've done for this country and bringing these cases to light, and again, bringing justice in hopes that people think twice about,
exactly.
your actions, because Amen. Jerry's going to be on the case otherwise. So we appreciate
exactly.
We appreciate your time here. So thank you
Thanks very much. Oh, and if you don't mind me asking, adding one tiny plug is if people are interested in Race Against Time, you can order it online. Amazon has it, and anybody else has it. And if you want signed copies, Lemuria Books and Jackson has them online. You can order them that way. And Kindle, if you like Kindle, they're on sale. Limited. And
he will also sign your Kindle.
Yeah, I can do that too. But if you, you email me, and you can send out my email to him, and I'm happy to anybody want to connect or anything. The student journalist who's interested in journalism, happy to talk about any of that stuff. But thanks very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jerry. I'll put a plug in for the book. The book was absolutely amazing. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mann. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks a lot, Jerry.
Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.